My English teacher made us sign contracts for total silence in class, then gave me detention for whispering to help a kid having a panic attack while she graded papers. What teacher made you hate school? Mrs. Harrison ran her English class like a monastery where she was the only one allowed to speak. She had this theory that teenagers couldn't actually learn while talking because their brains were too underdeveloped to multitask, which she'd read in some outdated education journal from the 90s. Even during group projects, we had to communicate through written notes passed silently between desks. She'd installed this app on her phone that measured decibel levels, and if it went above a whisper, she'd slam her hand on her desk and restart whatever assignment we were doing from the beginning. On day 1, she made us sign contracts stating we understood that any verbal communication would result in immediate detention and a call home. She literally gave a kid detention for sneezing too loudly once, saying he did it for attention. Her class was torture for everyone, but especially for kids who learned by talking through problems. We'd sit there for 50 minutes in dead silence, not even allowed to ask questions unless we wrote them on index cards and waited for her to collect them at the end of class. Partner work meant sitting next to someone and sliding papers back and forth like we were prisoners passing contraband. She had this whole system where we used different colored pens to show who wrote what, and she'd check to make sure both partners contributed equally without speaking. Kids started failing her class not because they didn't know the material, but because they couldn't figure out what she wanted without being able to ask. The guidance counselor got so many complaints that they tried to observe her class, but Mrs. Harrison just said it was an innovative teaching method that prepared us for standardized testing conditions. I figured out pretty quickly that if you knew how to control your volume, you could whisper barely loud enough for someone next to you to hear without triggering her decibel app. I'd practiced with my friend Jade during lunch, learning exactly how quiet we had to be. It was risky because Ms. Harrison would randomly patrol the room, but sometimes you had to communicate to survive her insane assignments. She also had this old camera in the corner that she claimed was just for security, but we all suspected she watched the footage to catch rule breakers. We were doing peer reviews on our essays about symbolism in The Great Gatsby, which meant 40 minutes of silent paper exchanges while Ms. Harrison sat at her desk grading papers from another class. I was paired with Aiden, this quiet kid who always sat in the back and never caused problems. About 10 minutes into the review, I noticed his hands were shaking as he tried to write feedback on my essay. His breathing was getting faster and shorter, and he kept touching his chest like he couldn't get enough air. I recognized what was happening because my sister had panic attacks. Aiden's eyes were huge and terrified, and he was starting to hyperventilate but trying to stay quiet because making noise would mean detention. He grabbed his throat like he was choking, and tears started rolling down his face. Mrs. Harrison was completely oblivious, humming to herself while highlighting something on her papers. Other kids noticed something was wrong, but nobody knew what to do, and Aiden was spiraling fast. I made the choice knowing exactly what I was risking. I leaned over and whispered as quietly as I could that he was having a panic attack and it would pass. I told him to breathe with me, counting to 4 on the inhale and 6 on the exhale. I kept my voice below the app's threshold, just barely loud enough for him to hear. I talked him through grounding techniques, telling him to name 5 things he could see, 4 he could touch, 3 he could hear. My voice was steady and calm even though my heart was racing because I knew I was breaking the cardinal rule. It took almost 10 minutes of constant whispered coaching, but his breathing finally slowed and his hands stopped shaking. He nodded at me, mouthing thank you, as the color came back to his face. Ms. Harrison never looked up once. When class ended,